Thanks for coming out to the Historical Society today. This is going to be, I think, one of the most interesting talks, and we've had plenty of interesting talks, but I think this one is going to be really cool. Before I introduce our speaker, I just want to say that he's graciously donating the whole proceeds from all the books sold in Kewanee to the Friends of Woodland Palace. It's a group with the Kewanee Preservation Society. We're really trying to raise enough money to stabilize and repair Fred's house. It's getting to be in pretty rough shape, particularly the roof and the solarium, and so every bit is going to help. And I think we're probably going to go through, today and maybe the next month or so, probably over, $2,500 or so of books. So that's a great thing. Also mentioned that after the talk, if you want, I know he's not going to put you to sleep, but we do have coffee and cookies to perk you up back here. So eat them up because I don't want to take any home. So with that, I'd like to introduce Larry Kuster. Larry was a teenager, I think, when he started this book. We were talking earlier, he's been working on it for quite some time. I think it's really a labor of love. So with that, Larry Kuster.
Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody who has come today for the launch of my book, Fred Francis, A Prairie State Genius. I mean, I am overwhelmed by the turnout. There are many people I want to thank and recognize for their contribution to my book. The first person is my wife, Mary, who for almost 55 years has been the love of my life and my rock. Mary has supported my efforts in writing this book and has listened ad nauseum while I have droned on about Fred. Unfortunately, for health reasons, Mary can't be here. The next people I want to thank are my late parents, Don and Rosemary Kuster. My interest and passion for telling Fred's story came from my mother, who was a leader in the mid-1970s community effort to restore Woodland Palace. I remember stories that my father and grandfather told me about Fred, and most of those stories are in the book. My cousin Candy Korn read an early manuscript and offered good suggestions and listened, like Mary, to my endless conversations about Fred. I also want to thank my sons David and Ryan, who made important contributions to the book's covers, both front and back. And a mentor throughout this process of researching and writing the book has been Dean Carew. He read an early manuscript, made valuable suggestions to improve how Fred's story was told. I cannot thank Dean enough for his encouragement and support. The City of Kewanee, Gary Bradley, Kevin Newton, the Francis Park hosts have been very helpful. I'm grateful for their assistance in literally opening doors to the palace and finding boxes in storage which helped me understand more about Fred's life and times. I want to thank Mark McInnes, Leanne Ballou, the Kewanee History Museum, the Kewanee Preservation Society, and the Chamber of Commerce for their support in bringing this all to fruition. There are so many others who have generously given of their time to help me complete the book. Unfortunately, there's not time to name each one of those people this afternoon, but I want everyone to know that Each of those persons has my eternal thanks and gratitude. My mother wanted to write a biography of Fred Francis, but her health and age prevented her from that happening. So I decided after my mother's passing that I would take the research materials that she had accumulated and make a start. First of all, I developed a timeline for these materials year by year of Fred's life. And then I began to pursue my own research to attempt to fill in the gaps. The Kewanee Public Library's digital records of Kewanee newspapers from the mid-1800s to the present provided valuable information about Fred, his times, the will contest lawsuit, and the recent efforts to preserve Woodland Palace. I found a similar resource at the University of Illinois Archives that had a student newspaper, the Illini, online as well as excellent files on Fred. Strangely enough, the COVID pandemic proved to be a welcome friend. It allowed me time to research and write about Fred. And my intent has been to tell as complete a story and as accurate a story about Fred's life and time as I could based upon the information that was available to me. This process has been much more interesting and insightful than I could ever imagine when I started. I assume that most of you know the basic story of Fred's life. He was born in 1856, 4 miles east of what is now the city of Kewanee. He was the first student from Kewanee to attend the Illinois Industrial University, now the University of Illinois, from 1878 to 1874 to 1878. He graduated in the groundbreaking field of mechanical engineering. And in 1879, he went to work for the Elgin National Watch Company in Elgin, Illinois. During his employment, and I believe this was early in his employment, he started in 1879, and I make the case that by 1881, he had invented either a hairspring device or a watch tool that allowed the company to wind its main springs of its watches tighter to prevent breakage. Hence, Elgin could boast of its watches that they had an unbreakable mainspring. Fred's invention, however, was shrouded in secrecy and has remained in secret ever since. He never filed a patent for that invention, nor did the company file a patent for that invention. Instead, and I got a lead from a patent attorney who indicated that there was probably a trade secret agreement because if they filed a patent in 14 years, all of the competitors could have gotten to his invention. This way, it was shrouded in secrecy for as long as the agreement was enforceable. And my book addresses why this was the case. Elgin paid Fred $1 a watch for every watch they produced using his invention. And this royalty allowed Fred to retire at age 34, marry the love of his life, Jeannie, and Mary, we use that loosely because we've never been able to find a wedding certificate or anything that records it. But he's very definite as to the date when they got married and indicates that several different places. And he went on to build Woodland Palace. Now, this is Fred's basic story, and I go into a lot more detail in terms of the book. But my research allowed me to understand that there was a lot more to Fred, and he was a lot more complex than people knew. Besides being incredibly intelligent, he was very spiritual and believed in God. He was not an atheist. In his youth and as a young man, Fred was good looking. This is a picture of him probably in the early 1880s. And, well, a later picture. He definitely was good looking enough to attract attention of the opposite sex. And during his time living in Elgin, he was something of a man about town. And there was even a list of most eligible bachelors in the newspaper, and by gosh, Fred's name came up. Well, the love of his life, though this is Fred as older, and he retained his look, so it's not always the scrawny guy that you got on the bookmarks around here. Fred married Jeannie, Jeanette Rice Crowfoot, who he called Jeannie. And his devotion to Jeannie was complete. When she passed in 1921, Fred was thrown into a depressive grief that lasted 4 months. And he dedicated the memorial in Woodland Palace to her, as well as he conducted out-of-door lectures each year near the anniversary of near her birthday until he passed in 1926. While Fred's genius and skill built Woodland Palace, the unsung hero in all of this, in my view, based on my research, is Jeannie. She had inspiration, I contend, in such things as the in-home refrigerator. Remember, they started building this house in 1890. Took them 10 years to get it substantially completed. Hot and cold running water. The water purification system for the house. My clue to Jeannie's role came from an interview that I had with my dad's cousin, Kenneth Kuster, whose father was my grandfather's brother. Fred told Ken's father, my Uncle Jack, that Jeannie could talk faster than Fred could think. And apparently, Jeannie talked real fast, and Fred was very deliberate in his speech. And as I reflected on that story, I realized Jeannie was not a passive partner in their relationship. She had opinions and expressed them. And Fred, as a wise husband, listened. I can imagine Jeannie complaining about the hard water where they lived, and hence the water purification system. Jeannie came from Elgin, where ice would have been available to fill an icebox, hence the in-home refrigerator. I can hear Jeannie commenting on all the work required to heat water on a wood-fired cook stove, hence hot and cold running water purification system. This is one of the pictures of the house. And that picture and house gives us another clue to Fred and Jeannie's relationship. And these are separate porches, on one on the east and one on the west. And there was just enough room on each porch for just one chair. This was their separate space, and it gave them a break from each other. These porches were places where they could meditate, read, as well as enjoy nature sounds during quiet summer evenings. My research found examples of a playfulness in their relationship. They had many common interests. They enjoyed traveling, and they also had their fair share of sorrow when Jeannie was diagnosed with tuberculosis in 1910. At that time, tuberculosis was the pandemic of the day. More than 400 people died a day in the United States at that time from tuberculosis. And in researching and in writing this book, I have addressed some of the stories and legends about Fred. These include his relationship with Jeannie's daughter, Maud, his devotion to physical culture movement, not receiving a diploma from the University of Illinois until 1914, the solution of his famous math problems, his travels, inventions, and whether Fred committed suicide. Another revelation from my research was how similar we are to the people of Fred's lifetime. They enjoyed a good time. They enjoyed a good joke. They got angry and upset. And it also pointed out that 18-year-old boys in 1870s were still just 18 years old. The people of that time contended with injustice, inequality, and war. They ordered furniture, food, equipment, and other necessities of daily life from places like Chicago, Boston, and other cities far from Kewanee, all of which were delivered to their door like Prime or Federal Express. You know, nothing is new under the sun. For me, the most important realization from my time with Fred, and sometimes as I was drafting things, I caught myself referring to Fred in the present tense instead of past tense, is that what Fred shows is that genius comes from the smallest places. When Fred was born, Kewanee was a tiny hamlet. Weathersfield was the big town. Chicago still had hogs running in the streets. None of these limitations that Fred and his family faced prevented them from seeing opportunities in the times in which they lived. The same principle applies to us today. When Fred was confronted with a problem, he found solutions. He thought outside the box, so to speak. His solutions were not necessarily overnight. It took 12 years for him to solve his math problem. When I started writing this book, I was impressed with what Fred had created in Woodland Palace. Having completed the book, I'm in awe of the achievement. Woodland Palace is truly a national treasure, and I hope you will join me in doing what each of us can to preserve this treasure for the future. And as I said before, all the proceeds from the sale of the book will go for the restoration fund of the palace. So I appreciate your attention, and I am more than happy to answer any questions that you have about Fred, and if I don't know the answer, I'll make it up as I go along. Anybody got a question? Dee?
Well, I do, because I've always subscribed to the myth that you bicycle the bricks, everything from Kewanee all the way out. And then in talking to some friends that I think had talked with you, that wasn't necessarily true. Is that right?
That is correct. That is not completely true. Fred brought out a lot of things on his bicycle. That's true. But I grew up with the story my grandfather told when people would comment about that. He said, "Oh, that's not true." Fred borrowed a wagon and a team of horses from my great-grandfather. And my grandfather said, you know what that damn fool did? He overloaded the wagon and broke the axle. And my grandfather, that was about as strong a language as I ever heard out of him, but that's what he ascribed. Now, I also found in my research that he borrowed a wagon from Mark Bowen's great-grandfather, and well as he borrowed a wagon from his own father's Sullivan Ritter Francis. So, let's see, there was another question. Yeah.
You were talking about the sort of myths and legends, and one of the ones you touched on was Jeannie and her daughter. Could you maybe
Sure.
expand on that a little?
That's been the most salacious gossip, and I grew up with. Here's what I grew up with: the story that Fred had gone to was working at Elgin Watch Company, and he met Jeannie's daughter Maud, and he began a love affair with her. And then she was dying from tuberculosis, and she made him promise on her deathbed that Fred would marry her mother and take care of her. Well, okay, that makes a really nice story, but the problem is, a year after Fred and Jeannie got married, I found the marriage certificate of Maud to a gentleman, Edwin, something like that, in Chicago. Now, I found her grave marker, which she from Maud. Maud was buried up in the Chicago area. I found her grave marker on Find a Grave headstone or something like that. I haven't been able to find her death certificate. So I don't know. She might have died in childbirth, so that is clearly not true. And you know, so get into some of the stories. One of the other ones was that Fred's father had taken up, his wife was, Fred's mother was ill, according to the story, and he took up with another woman and Fred's father divorced Fred's mother only after this other woman who was staying with them got pregnant. Well, that's wholly not true. Because I found the divorce decree between Sullivan Ritter Francis and his wife Mary that was entered in 1875, and Fred's father didn't marry Anna until 1877. So there was, and there were no children born or anything like that. So, but it's amazing what gets buried in the Henry County Courthouse. Yes.
In your research, the interior of the home, have you ever read anything or seen anything that described like the colors of the walls or any kind of decor?
No, I haven't. I haven't. Nothing like that.
I have.
Yes.
Okay, so Fred lived on that property where the house is. Where did his parents live conjunction to that?
Okay. It's when you're going out toward Neponset, and you turn left to go into the park.
Right.
If you turn right and go over the railroad tracks, that's where the house was.
Okay.
And I remember as a kid, I remember the house that was there. There was somebody else that was living there, was farming it, but that's where it was.
Okay.
And Fred bought 40 of the 60 acres that's Francis Park from his father.
Okay. And so Sullivan lived in town?
No, Sullivan Ritter Francis lived out there. Now, Sullivan had by his second, or well, it would be his third marriage, had three children.
Okay.
And one of them was another Sullivan
Francis.
Francis.
Does that one live in
that
town?
was called, and his nickname was Sully.
Okay. Did he live in town?
He lived in town.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
So he had half siblings, but Fred Francis had half siblings. Is that right?
Yeah.
Fred Francis had what, I'm sorry?
He had half
Yes,
brothers?
yes.
He didn't have any full siblings? Is
Yes,
that
he
right?
did. He did.
Okay.
The marriage between Sullivan Ritter and Mary produced they had at least, I think they had 7 children altogether, and at least 3 of them died before the age of 4. He had a brother, Lewis, who lived to adulthood, and I may be, when I said 7, that may be a little bit too many children, but yes. But by the time, Lewis died, I think in 1922, something like that. It was after Jeannie's death.
So were his siblings similar as far as being
No.
gifted and did
No.
they do anything extraordinary? Or?
None of Fred had 2 older brothers, Homer and Jerome, and they lived to adulthood, but had died well before Fred died. No, it was really interesting. It was Sullivan Ritter Francis who understood the gift that Fred had intellectually, and spent a lot of money for that time to help Fred get tutored so he would be eligible and ready and be able to pass the entrance exam to the Illinois Industrial University. And you would think it would be the older children, but it was Fred that got singled out for that. And the half siblings were the reason for the will contest suit. Fred cut them out of the will and made no bones in his will about he didn't want them to inherit anything. And he even went to the point where the paper that he wrote this on was kind of like, I guess, kind of a packing paper he wrote his will on. And it was such, and the reason he chose that is because he didn't want anybody to be able to alter his will. So there was a lot of mistrust. And I go into the book about some of the reasons I believe there was all that mistrust. Yes?
Did you find anything about how the property came into the hands of the city of Kewanee? That had something to do with the will too, I believe.
Yes, yes. I mean, Fred, in his will, left the property, the house, and all of his money, which at the time, for that time, was considerable, to the city of Kewanee as the primary beneficiary. And it's really interesting how things got rolled out really quickly after Fred died. They found him dead on the 22nd, I think, 23rd of December, and the next day in the paper, it was announced that Kewanee was the beneficiary of his will, even before it was admitted to probate. So and he had been planning that, I think, for some time.
Yeah, obviously, apparently, maybe told somebody, what his plans were or something. But there's also a story that floats around about how the secondary or the beneficiary by default was going to be the University of Illinois. The people have said, we should go to the University of Illinois and see if they would take over the parking and all that sort of thing.
Well,
the University of Illinois playing with the will at all.
It wasn't specifically the University of Illinois, although I think there's a good case that the University of Illinois paid a lot of attention to Fred. And I think they were trying to get him there in the hopes that he would leave his estate to the university. But the second beneficiary was the Henry County Alumni Association for the University of Illinois. So it wasn't, and then he made various requests in if the city didn't take the property. Yes?
So, you think there's a question about whether he committed suicide or not? Because I've always heard he wrote a letter to the postman and then, so is there a question about that?
In my view, he did not commit suicide. Sully Francis, about a month or so after Fred's death, made a statement in the papers that Fred had committed suicide because they found, on a second search, they found a revolver. Fred was very clear that he didn't like guns, he didn't like violence, any of that sort of thing. And I consulted with a general surgeon that I know, explained what was going on with Fred health-wise, and the strangulated hernia can cause incredible pain, and the surgeon, which is consistent with the doctor who was there at the scene, was that he then had a pulmonary embolism that cut short his life, and that was a benefit because he would have been in excruciating pain otherwise.
Why do you think he was trying to put it out there that, hey, he committed suicide? I mean, I'm just pushing the envelope here.
Sure. Because, and it was something that was referred to in the will contest, the tremendous prejudice at that time against suicide and trying to overturn the will on the idea that Fred was not of sound mind and memory. One of the pieces of information would have been that he committed suicide. And Fred was doing too many things at that time that were planning into the future. I think the gun was planted, is what I think.
So maybe greed was a motivator.
Yes, I think it was all about the money. Yeah. Yes?
Why didn't he graduate to 1914? Why was that?
That very, very good question. I address several of the different theories in the book. And one of them is that he hadn't solved the mathematics problem. Another one was that he hadn't attended the required religion course. Well, the university didn't have a required religion course, according to the catalogs at that time, for mechanical engineering students. He attended chapel and was a fairly regular attendee. We've only got 1 year, but in 1 year, he only missed 3 chapels over the course of the year. What I think is a really mundane reason, and it's consistent with how things work today. The Illinois General Assembly only approved in like 1877, 1878, that the university could award a Bachelor of Science or a Bachelor of Arts. Prior to that time, what was awarded was a certificate of completion of studies in X field, not a bachelor's degree. And what I believe is the situation is that higher education then, just like higher education now, works at its own pace. And for them to switch from awarding certificates to awarding degrees took various reviews, even though the faculty was much smaller. And I can imagine that there might have been a couple of professors there who disagreed with how they should do it. So he got a certificate of completion. Now the interesting thing was that Fred's name, even though it was listed at the start of the 1877-1878 academic year as one of 3 students in mechanical engineering, his name doesn't show up on any of the student day activities at graduation and commencement. So why that happened, whether he attended, whether he didn't, we don't know. The other thing is, we're the ones who put so much store on a diploma. I don't think the people at that time put the same store, the same emphasis on the fact that you've got a piece of paper that says Bachelor of Arts or Bachelor of Science. I think all the Elgin Watch Company was interested in was the certificate. Did you go through? Were you able to do this? And one of the interesting stories that I was told by my grandfather is that, and this is something he said Fred told him, when Fred started to work at the Elgin Watch Company on the watch tools floor, his foreman came to him and said he wanted him to calculate how much sawdust there would be from a 3/16 inch hole if you drilled it in a 2x4. So after a little bit, Fred came and told him what the answer was. And the foreman said, "Where's your calculations?" And Fred said, "If I have to write things down for a simple problem like that, I'm going to quit." And that's followed up by, in February of 1910, the farmhouse out at the farm that I grew up on burned to the ground. And Fred came out with other people and they cleaned out the basement, and the cook stove had fallen down from the first floor down into the basement. So they cleaned it all out and they put a temporary roof over it, so there was some place for the women to be. And Fred came down and sawed the rafters for that makeshift temporary roof, and my grandfather was assigned to help him. And he asked Fred, do you want a level square? And Fred looked at him and said, if I can't saw these straight now, I'm going to quit. And my grandfather said every one of them was sawed perfect. Gives you an idea of Fred.
Did he start doing the health talks on his premises after Jeannie died?
Yes, the first one, she died in 21. The first one he did was in July of 22. And that one is at the Kewanee Public Library, that outdoor lecture. Unfortunately, none of the others survived other than reports in the newspaper. Yes?
Going back to Leanne's, going back a ways to the comment about Fred's parents' home, the one that's across the road. There's a story that that little miniature log cabin out there called the playground was made from wood from the original home.
That's true. That's true.
This
Yeah.
little log cabin.
Right, and, yeah, there's, among the various research materials that I had, there's a letter from Fred's brother saying it's a good thing you took, the picture, and because, this stuff's tumbling down. And so he went and recreated it. Yes?
Something pertaining to the house. So we know Fred built the house. Did he build everything in that house? Like he did the finishing woodwork, he did, just for instance, we were poking around out there and to get to the porch, the little porches, so the shutters go up. Did he make the shutters? Did he make
He did it, he did everything.
And
Yeah, I mean, the only other
my
person
gosh.
that was really involved in all of that was Jeannie.
the little levers to push out the storms and everything. Oh my golly.
Everything else, and
Oh my gosh.
Fred did it all, and it was amazing when they after they came back from, at the time, quite an extensive and luxury-filled honeymoon out to, they wound up on Cape Cod, because they had family on both sides. And they came back, and they literally came back to a house that had, kind of a foundation and rafters. They didn't have a roof. And, so they basically camped out. So, Jeannie really loved Fred to put up with that. Yes.
Do you know how much U of I regards him as a alumnus? Like early on you said there was something about with the will. Years later, have they kept track of him and so on? And also I know U of I has an alumni magazine, so I didn't know, have they highlighted him in any articles the last few decades?
Yes.
It might help with fundraising if you put it in the article about the fundraising. You never know what some other U of I alumnus maybe want to donate.
Yeah, Fred, the alumni office, development office at the University of Illinois has periodically run articles about Fred. And so when I contacted the archives to see about, oh, absolutely, and they brought out materials and stuff like that. They were very pleased with the idea that you know, working on all of this. So,
Is there a transcript of his grades?
yes, there was, and with a few exceptions, like 2 or 3, everything was between 95 and 100. So, yeah. Yes.
Just kind of expanding on that, like if you would go to the University of Illinois, like to visit your child, maybe that's a student there now, would there be things to see? Like, is there a specific place you could go as like a layperson or just a visitor to see anything about Fred Francis, or would it all be in the archives?
Well, that would all be in the archives, but the memorial clock that he was involved, and some call it the memorial clock, some people call it the tower clock. He was very much involved with Professor S.W. Robinson in the designing, building, and getting that all operational. And that clock is still operating today, and it's in one of the engineering buildings. And you can go there and you can see it, and I make reference to which building it is in. But this, and there's a great story about that Fred told, is they got this watch, or this clock, and they hauled it up into this tower, and they put it all together, and they started it, and there were the cheers and everything by that, and Fred watched it, and this Professor Robinson watched it, and after everybody had kind of dispersed, the professor and Fred said, "There's something we're missing here with this watch, or this clock," and the professor said, "Yes." He said, "There's an escapement or something that we don't have in here, so we can't make sure it's going to make accurate time." So that night, in the middle of the night, Fred and Professor Robinson climb up the stairs and they fix the problem. And it wasn't until about 1914 that Fred revealed to his classmates the cloak and dagger adventure that he had had with Professor Robinson. So, well, I'm happy to answer more questions. One of my sons pointed out that in any conversation with me, if it goes on long enough, it somehow circles back to Fred Francis. And you get a little bit of a sense of what my poor wife has had to put up with all of these years. But if there's one last question, otherwise, thank you very, very much.